I know I can't be alone in this experience where you're too Latina for the Black people, but you're too Black for the Latino people. And I've literally experienced that myself, where I've been around fellow Latina women and they're like, oh, they're either, especially when I have my curly hair out, they're like, oh, like you're Latina, or, you know, they question that. Or they also like, oh yeah, she's Latina, but she's like urban. Oh, I'm Black. Just say that, you know, just say that. Like, I'm too Black for you, you know? And, but then when you're around the Black folk, they're like, but she speaks Spanish. So there's no way that you can be Black. And I'm like, Black people can't speak Spanish. I'm like, the way that I can best explain it to people, I'm like, I'm a Black girl that speaks Spanish.
What up? It's Dramos, and this is the recap. Of course, as I do each and every week, breaking down some of the biggest headlines from this last week. We are also in the midst of Women's History Month, so I'll be doing a bunch of things throughout the show to honor that, of course, including my guest for this week, who is Ada Rojas, who's just an incredible entrepreneur, who's actually the founder of Botánika Beauty and her latest venture, Vecina Couture. So she'll be on to help me break down some of the biggest stories, also just giving us some perspective when it comes to finances and, you know, in our community, all the things we need to be looking out for when we're building businesses or just trying to build generational wealth. Now, before she hops on, though, let's get into some of the BS from this last week, man. Now, it's hard to believe, but this last week, we saw the 1-year anniversary of the global pandemic of COVID-19. Now, amidst all the tragedy and loss, at least, you know, we can stand here proudly 1 year later saying that, you know, with all that's behind us, at least the world came together. You know, we as human beings, we all stood by one another. And this was all, of course, done under incredible leadership that collectively followed science and logic. And if you believe that, I have a prince in Nigeria who just reached out to me about this incredible investment opportunity, and I'd be more than happy to forward you the email so you too can get in on that action. Now, what actually happened this last year amidst this global pandemic was toilet paper somehow became a commodity that was worth getting beat up over.
The fight over toilet paper that went viral around the world.
I just want one pack. No, not one pack.
People also decided that this would be the year they got their news from TikTok, which, of course, led to all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories, including ones like the virus was somehow connected to the lightning fast and always reliable services of Verizon 5G. And while it's not an ad, Verizon, I am not above collecting a check from you guys, just saying. But I have to say, my personal favorite of these whole coronavirus, you know, conspiracy theories had to be that this whole thing was nothing more than some sort of diabolical plot from Microsoft founder Bill Gates. And this one, I actually kind of do get. I mean, let's be real for a second. Bill Gates and his subpar computer products are probably the reason why most of us even know how to use the word virus in a sentence. But let's be real here. It's far more likely that Bill Gates spends his free time in his basement playing with action figures rather than devising a plan to destroy mankind as we know it. But on a serious note, let's be real. For a while, things were tough. I mean, for months, many of us, we burned holes in our couches while wearing the same pair of Costco sweatpants for weeks at a time, all while day drinking as if we were on some sort of weird, like, never-ending spring break. And let's not forget the quarantine 15, where we overate as we attempted to try every restaurant on Grubhub within a 10-mile radius of our couch. And all this done while wondering when will be the next time we'd be able to see the people that we love. Now, on the bright side of things, if you're seeing my face, you're hearing my voice, you're watching this screen right now, congratulations. Because no matter how hard it seems like the U.S. government was trying to let us all die, you are not amongst the over 500,000 people who have died from COVID-19 in the U.S. alone. And while we've seen so much pain and so much loss in this country, at least we can say that the people and leaders of this country, they seem to have learned from their mistakes and are finally coming together for the greater good of the world. And if you believe that, my friend, the Nigerian prince, he's really excited to meet you. Now, while it's true, President Biden has been pretty effective at ramping up vaccine manufacturing and is promising that there will be vaccines available for all Americans by the end of April, the reality is less than 19% of the population have received their first dose. Yes, less than 19% of people have received their first dose of the vaccine. And even with that fact, always remaining on brand to the idea that government officials don't give a damn about the people who put them in office, new states are continuing to now roll back their mandatory mask mandates, totaling in 16 states, somehow just pretending as if somehow COVID decided to pull a SpongeBob and give you the old, all right, I'm gonna head out. Now, listen, I understand if your argument is that people need to get back to work and businesses need to reopen. Like, I really do. But why take away the mask mandate when we have proof that it's working in slowing down the spread? I mean, that's like, wearing a condom the entire time you're having sex and then deciding right before you know what, I'm not gonna finish that line at the risk of getting fined or fired. But I think you know where I was going with that one. Actually, you know what? I'll do a more family-friendly analogy here. All right, it's the last few minutes of the big game. We're up by 1. All we have to do is play some solid defense, and we win. Sounds easy enough, except for the fact that our bozo coach has decided for no logical reason to pull our all-star goalie from the game with only a minute left. Now, the only difference between that analogy and what's happening right now, our bozo coach, well, they're an elected official here in our government. And the game we're playing, well, it's one of life and death. Now, we always end on a heavy note, I feel like, with the BS here. So, as we usually do, we'll lighten it up with my guest this week. Now, my guest this week is an incredible entrepreneur. She's actually a self-proclaimed, soul-centered, creative entrepreneur and the founder of Botánika Beauty and Vecina Couture. Ada Rojas, how we feeling?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for hopping on. I know you're a busy woman. You got 1,000,001 things going on, so I appreciate you hopping on with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, I mean, listen, we'll get into all that you have going on, but if you don't mind, let's touch on some like current events from this last week. I'm curious to get your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, I mean, let's dive into. I mean, this last week we had International Women's Day, right? So, huge day. I mean, I feel like this is the first time that I'm probably hearing about it. I feel like it really got a lot of publicity this year. A lot of people participating. But I mean, let's talk about for you personally why things like this are so important, and for you what the meaning of it all is.
Well, for me, celebrating Women's Day is, I mean, there's so much. Where do we begin, right? Yeah. And not only like celebrating women, but highlighting the incredible women in our community who are out here doing amazing things. And specifically as an Afro-Latina, like Black women, right? Yeah. I mean, when you start to look at the data, at the facts, like Latina and Black women are opening up businesses at like such a crazy rate compared to our counterparts. And, I just love that there's a month to celebrate us. There's a month to celebrate women. There's a specific day to highlight women. And I just love that we're finally getting the recognition we deserve because we've been out here working hard.
Of course. I mean, let's kind of dive into it. I mean, why do you kind of feel like, or what is it that is holding women back from getting that recognition? You know what I mean? Obviously, there's so many decades of things that we can go into, but I guess what are the actionable steps that we could be taking? What are the things that people should be looking out for to kind of recognize what is happening and how women have been oppressed and continue to be oppressed and marginalized?
I mean, the microaggressions, the women not being in positions of power and leadership, women not having money. Like, the world wins when women make more money. I just don't understand. I mean, there's so much data and so much things to prove the fact that when we are in positions of power and when we have access to money, that the world is a better place. So I think just putting more women in high level earning positions, to really make change within companies, within communities, within the world, like that's the arena we need to move in, because everybody benefits from women having money and having power.
I do want to dive into something. I saw an Instagram post you had posted kind of concerning this idea of building wealth and knowledge and all these different things, but how it does look a bit different for people of color. I do want to dive into that. I mean, we're kind of seeing what we saw this week. It was announced that Marcia Fudge actually became the first Black woman in over 40 years to lead HUD, which for anybody who doesn't know is the Department for Housing and Urban Development in this country, which deals with housing and all these different things. I mean, Biden has said that he wants home ownership to be a human right. Obviously, these are things they're trying to do to hopefully close that wealth gap that we hear so much about. But I saw something that you had posted that I found to be super interesting, where you talked about, we all see these things of like positive affirmations and people telling you, oh, entrepreneurship and all this stuff. But realizing that for, our white counterparts here in this country, that looks a bit different for us because we're also dealing with generations of trauma and amongst other things. So, I mean, would you mind kind of expounding upon this work that you feel like people of color have to do before they even start trying to tackle this whole generational wealth concept?
Yeah, so on my Instagram, I shared a post. I actually took a beginner's stock market course last weekend, and it just kind of blew my mind open to all this new information. And it made me want to shift the way that I'm moving with my money and just the way that I'm even moving in my business and I'm moving personally. And one of the things that we discussed in the class, because it was led by a woman of color, was how even before we can start discussing investing, even before we start talking about all these mindset shifts when it comes to just affirmations and scarcity mindset versus a thriver's mindset, we have to address the fact that we have a lot of trauma that has been passed down to us from generation to generation because we come from poverty and because we come from scarcity. So that fact alone just, it's like we have so much work to do before we can even arrive at the point of thinking of investing, before we can even arrive at the point of thinking of home ownership. Sure. And I just think it's important to address those things and really work on our money wounds, work on that trauma, do the healing, because it's just impossible for you to even start those steps and begin those processes without addressing that. And it does make it harder for us, but it doesn't make it impossible. And I think the more that we openly talk about it and discuss it, the more it's going to become a thing,
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about that, and I'm not sure if this is exactly how you meant it, but, having conversations with different people in my life and, talking about kind of this idea of chasing that hungry ghost almost, you know what I mean? You're always chasing this thing that you never had. I think it's interesting, when you say that, it almost, kind of makes you realize like, wow, when we get money, when people of color get money, whether it's in the entertainment industry, all these things, we end up kind of squandering a lot of times on these dumb things that we think kind of represent wealth. And it probably is, a factor in this trauma that we've had of seeing all these other people kind of having these grandiose things. We've never had them. So now we get into a position to possibly win for the first time. And now we're just kind of squandering on these dumb things that we really don't need, because in our mind, that's what actual wealth is,
And we don't have the knowledge to understand not only how to create wealth, but how to keep wealth.
Yes, there you go.
And that's another thing that we see a lot. We see a lot with whether it's our families, whether maybe our grandparents were entrepreneurs or created some sort of wealth from our family, but then they passed it down to our parents and our parents didn't know how to manage the wealth and keep it going. So there's just a lack of information, resources, knowledge within our community that it's like, not only don't we really know how to create wealth, we don't know how to keep it within the family as well.
Yeah, and sadly, that's not spoken about enough, right? There's so much talk about building wealth and tactics for doing it, but the idea of keeping it, which obviously probably isn't, I guess, as sexy as the idea of getting rich, but equally, or if not more important, I mean, I think I was reading Think and Grow Rich, and in that book, he talks about how a lot of times people, when they get a raise, let's say in their normal job, their expenses go up because they start giving themselves more of a leash to spend more money. And what happens with that is you never end up actually growing, just keep staying at the same place, because that extra money is now going towards new expenses that you didn't have before and you don't necessarily need.
Correct. And it's like, we think, oh, we've made it, so now we have to completely change our lifestyle. No, find ways to still operate, because the cool thing, or not the cool thing, but I think the innovative thing about us growing the way that we grew up is that we know how to make $1 out of 15 cents. Sure. We know how to be creative. It had forced us to be creative as hell to be able to get the same results that our white counterparts have gotten, right? And we know how to work hard. We know how to make things happen. We know how to be creative. So kind of like always holding on to that, even as you start to elevate in your life, even as your financial status starts to elevate, and really find ways to make your money work for you instead of continuing to work harder, really work smarter.
Yeah. I mean, you actually touched on something incredibly important, like living in La Brega, right? Like that's like this thing that we hold on to, like it's this point of something to be proud of, right? Being able to make something out of nothing at all times. But the reality is, and this was from a podcast, I believe it was WNYC did it, but the reality is we shouldn't allow ourselves to get so used to living in the struggle, because then we just start normalizing the struggle as if that's how we are supposed to live, as opposed to saying, yes, we can, live in the struggle, but the goal should be to never have to go back to that, right? That should be the bigger picture goal. And unfortunately, we like idolize this idea that we can survive anything,
Absolutely. And that's where addressing your money wounds come from and really realizing the difference between operating from a scarcity mindset and a thriving mindset. So this morning, I was actually having a great conversation with my accountant, and I was telling him how I worked so hard to get to this financial point in my life. Like, I've been cleaning up just a lot of messes that I made in my early 20s because I just didn't know any better.
Right.
And now I'm also building another business at the same time. So there's a lot of money coming in, but that money's going out, whether it's paying for taxes, whether it's paying for my inventory and things like that. And it's scary. And I'm constantly reminding myself, okay, the money's going out, but there's more money coming. It's okay. Like, you know, and again, going back to the way that we were raised, out, these things have been passed down to us from generation to generation. So it's not going to happen overnight where you suddenly wake up one day and you're like, my money's good. My mindset is good. I'm good. No, those triggers are going to keep coming up. And so you have to identify them and then learn to like talk to yourself and be like, no, you're good. There's more money coming.
What's scary, you're actually hitting on something I personally have been going through because I recently just bought my first home. And obviously within that, there's so many expenses that come in. But I'm so scarred from not having money that anytime I spend it, I feel guilty. I feel like I get anxious. I can't even enjoy this process of having like furnishing my home and doing all these things because every time I spend money, I get just like this feeling of anxiety. I remember what it was like to not have anything and to be counting every penny. And it's like, it's a really incredible thing that I never even had to think about until now that I'm realizing how much trauma I'm trying to get over myself personally as well.
Yeah. And you know what has helped a lot? And I've always been a huge advocate for mental health. I have had an amazing relationship with my therapist, who's also Latina as well, for the last 8 years. Mm-hmm. And this money conversation came up in my therapy session this week. So it's like, it's so important to have this team, right? You have your accountant, you have your lawyer, you have your therapist to really walk you through these things, because these are all new experiences that we've never been through before. And as like first, you're probably the first homeowner in your family, right? Or I'm sure like there's a lot of firsts that you're conquering that your parents haven't.
First investment property in my family for sure. That's the first.
Yes, and it's a whole new mindset. And so just having like to be able to talk to my therapist about these money wounds and for her to identify and remind me that like, hey, like you are not your money. Like if something happens and you were to lose your money overnight, guess what? You have all the skills and the talent to make that money back. And you know, it was such a huge reminder.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely beautiful. And like these conversations are so important because I feel like they get lost in the whole shuffle of what is the more fascinating thing when it comes to building wealth. But, you know, this whole idea of what happens when you get it, you know, it's a whole other conversation that definitely needs to be addressed. Now, I do want to also quickly kind of shift gears. I mean, because you as an Afro-Latina and anybody that is Afro-Latina, Afro-Latino, you guys, it's interesting to me because sadly you exist in this gray area, even within the Latin community, then within the, you know, rest of the world as well. You know, it's kind of like, where do you fit in? And there's so many, you know, cases of racism within and without the Latin community that makes you feel that way, I feel like. So I feel like, you know, looking at something that was a big story this last week when it comes to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, right? I feel like somebody like yourself could probably relate to certain things that we saw. I mean, she was talking about a lot of things like mental health, which we were just talking about. But B was talking about this, you know, this idea that people were concerned about the skin tone of her baby when it came to the royal family and all these different things. I mean, you know, what was interesting about this to me, though, she got a lot of positive, feedback from it. But there were also some people giving her crap about it. You know, people like Piers Morgan or Bethany Frankel. And it kind of points out this glaring thing that there are people in this world that think just because they haven't personally witnessed, you know, your type of racism or your type of, you know, whatever the case may be, whatever mistreatment you face in life, that it must not exist, because it's like they almost think they're too smart and too cultured to possibly have a blind spot to this. And I feel like somebody like yourself has probably had so many experiences similar to that, where people, even within your own Latin community, don't understand your own struggle. So, I mean, I would love to kind of hear any experiences you've had or how you kind of struggle with this.
My whole life, which is what led me to create my online platform, because I felt like, I know I can't be alone in this experience where you're too Latina for the Black people, but you're too Black for the Latino people. And I've literally experienced that myself, where I've been around fellow Latina women and they're like, oh, they're either, especially when I have my curly hair out, they're like, oh, like you're Latina, or, you know, they question that. Or they also like, oh yeah, she's Latina, but she's like urban.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm black.
Right.
Just say that, you know, just say that. Like, I'm too black for you, you know? And, but then when you're around the black folk, they're like, but she speaks Spanish. So there's no way that you can be black. And I'm like, black people can't speak Spanish. I'm like, the way that I can best explain it to people, I'm like, I'm a black girl that speaks Spanish. And it's like mind blowing to them. So it's things that I've experienced all my life. And it's hard too, because when you grow up in a bubble, like, you know, I grew up in New York, I grew up around my Dominican community. I grew up in a melting pot. So like my identity was never questioned. It was always really when I got outside of that bubble where people would be like, are you mixed? Are you black? Are you, you know, so it's like, then even battling my own identity issues with like when people would not knowing, right? Not really knowing, and that racism being passed down from generation to generation because of the way that we grew up. When people would ask me, are you black? I would be like, no, I'm Dominican. Like, what do you mean? Am I black? Right. So just learning the history and learning and identifying and really doing the work on myself to be able to identify with my own identity and to be able to stand in my own truth and everything. I mean, it's a whole process, but that's really what led me to create my community online, because I wanted to have these conversations and these dialogue, because I knew I wasn't the only one that was experiencing the world like this too.
Sure. I mean, is there anything you can think of that maybe has gotten you closer to that healing, or was maybe that wake-up call that, you know, this is not something that you should be ashamed of rather than something you should be embracing? You know, was there any moment in either one of those kind of categories?
I think I know for sure my moment where kind of like, I'm like, oh my God, was when I was in college. I took a Caribbean and Black Studies class. Okay. And I remember just sitting in class and they're talking about like the slave trade and everything that happened, and the percentage of Black people in the Republic and the percentage of Black people in Brazil, like the fact that there's more Black people in Brazil yet than whites, but Black people are still the minority there. That was all mind blowing to me. And I remember sitting in class being like, holy shit, I'm Black. And it's not, it just wasn't something that was discussed in my household. You know, it wasn't, you know, so it's like the world perceives me as a Black woman because I can't remove that from me. Like when you see me, you're like, okay, she's either mixed or she's Black. Right. And then kind of like coming to terms with that on yourself, but also kind of starting to stand in that truth, because now you're identifying as a Black woman, because you realize that your entire life, it's like everyone else saw you as Black, but for whatever reason, your parents never wanted to have that discussion, you know? And so then having to also stand in your Blackness, right? When people question it, when people are like, there was a point in my life where I felt like I had to be defensive about it. And I remember saying things like, okay, I just couldn't fathom how people could, like, okay, Alicia Keys is Black. You never question Alicia Keys' like identity, right? She's a mixed woman, but she's a Black woman, right? But yet people are questioning me and how, you know, my Blackness. So there was a time in my life that was more, I always wanted to kind of prove it in a way, like when people would try to question me. Now it's like, I don't have to prove anything to anyone. I know my identity. I know the experiences that I've had in my life. I know my truth. I know what I stand for, and I don't have to prove anything to you. I don't have to prove my Blackness to you.
Yeah, no, that's such a beautiful thing. I mean, obviously for me, it's kind of the polar opposite. Like I you know, people say I'm white passing, you know, so it was always interesting to me because I can never fully assimilate into things because I'm always looked at as other, right? And I don't, you know, experience the complexes of growing up Black in America, you know what I mean? As far as the overt racism and all that stuff, I'll never try and pretend like I can truly walk in those shoes. But even stupid little things, like I can remember as a kid, like, you know, if my white friends came over and my house smelled a little bit different, like that became something I became self-conscious about. Like I no longer wanted people over my house because I was nervous I was going to get made fun of as a kid because my house smelled like, you know, adobo, you know what I mean? Like it had a little spot. Mm-hmm. And those are dumb little things, but it does begin to have this complex that you start to grow up with as if I'm lesser than these people, you know? Absolutely. And you know, they're not going to be able to understand that complex, and a lot of people will brush it off, but these all build into this idea that as we get older, we're just kind of being reinforced as to being lesser than, you know, even if it's in the smallest way. And then obviously when you then become, you know, experienced with real overt racism and people truly trying to hold you back and you know, oppress you, that just compounds into even more trauma that you take with you even further in your life.
Yes, and absolutely. To even understanding all the privileges that I have as a lighter skinned Black woman, understanding all the privileges that I have as a mixed woman, and really passing the mic and making space for, you know, darker Black women, and really understanding that they also have a different experience than I do, you know? And so just really understanding all those nuances and always making space for other people's experiences. And really, if you're in the room and the conversation is centered around Blackness, okay, do I I really need to be up there sharing my experiences? No, right? Like pass the mic, learning to like read the room and pass the mic, and really always kind of keeping that at the forefront, you know?
Yeah. I think the one thing you kind of hit on the head that like wraps this all up is, you know, being open to other people's experiences. Because I think a lot of times when you're talking about things like racism, other people will take it as, oh, well, now you're basically essentially saying I'm not perceptive in what's going on around me. I'm not smart, all these different things. And that's just not what it is. Even the most intelligent people in the world have blind spots. You know what I mean? If you grew up in a vacuum in your own bubble, you're not going to know about racism in the same way that a Black person is going to know about that in a certain area, you know, living in the South or something like that, you know? So I think like what you said is being open to other people's experiences is really all that people are asking for, all that we're asking for, and would truly make this whole experience of life that much easier, I feel like.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, as we wrap up, the last thing I want to touch on a lot of things that you're doing. I mean, you're obviously making it your purpose to educate people. I mean, you've had a very, you know, successful career in business thus far. And it's beautiful to see that you're kind of giving this back and trying to give back this information to people and make it a point. So, I mean, let's kind of talk about the work that you're doing. What are some of the things you're more excited about that you're working on right now?
Well, right now, I actually exited from my last company, which is Botánika Beauty. I exited from that company this year, and for the last 2 years, I had been working on my other business, which is Vecina Couture. And Vecina Couture is basically a made-to-order collection of comfortable classics. So I always remember, like when my great-grandmother passed, we all fought over her bata that she would wear at home. And I was like, damn, like who's making batas for us? Like, you know, like the bata is such like a matriarch wardrobe staple, right? And especially with us working from home now, like I'm always in batas, I'm always in a robe. And so I wanted to make like batas for us, the future matriarchs, while honoring the women who came before us. So that's what Vecina Couture is about. We're getting ready to launch like our first collection in the next coming weeks, which I'm so excited about. But even with that, I understand that again, there's so much. There's no access, there's no knowledge about how do you really build a business from the ground up, and how do you build it where you have everything in place so that you can scale and you're not scaling into debt? How do you build it to where it's profitable? How do you build it to like, so because I've just learned so much in my business journey, the way that I'm building and growing this business is completely different than the way that I've done other businesses, because I just have so much more knowledge and expertise now. So I'm really making it a point to bring the community with me along on this journey and sharing as many things as I can, to hopefully help other entrepreneurs, because I know if I would have known the things that I know now, I probably wouldn't have made as many mistakes in my business. So for example, recently I did an Instagram live with one of my lawyers. She's a small business lawyer, Afro-Latina as well. And we did, you know, like the common mistakes that you should be avoiding when starting your business. And I think like, how different would my life be if I would have came across a video like that a few years ago? How different would my businesses be set up if I knew that information? And it's basic information to someone like me, someone like my lawyer, but it's not basic information to someone who's just starting out their business. So I'm really passionate about just educating and sharing all of my personal experiences and the things that I've grown, and taking really my lessons, taking those L's, turning them into lessons, and sharing those gems back with the community.
No, I love that. All right, so before you get out of here, I mean, a lot of people are either out of work or maybe sitting on a little bit more money than they were before because they're not commuting anymore, they're working from home. Are there like 3 quick things, like anybody interested in starting a business, are there 3 precursors that they should be thinking about on their radar right now when they're trying to make the most of this moment or trying to bounce back right now and starting their entrepreneurial journey?
Yes. So the number one thing when you're starting a business, you always want to be solving a problem. So identify what's a problem right now in your life. Like, is it a service problem? Is there a service that exists that doesn't exist that you're like, this would be a great service? Is there a product that doesn't exist that you're like, this would be a great product, and you already know that there's a market need for that? Kind of identify and solve a problem right now, and then work backwards from that. Find the target audience, and that's how you start. If you're sitting on a little bit of extra money and you don't want to work and build a business, look into the stock market. How can you invest that money and make that money work for you? I mean, there's so many things. If you're looking to make a little bit money, look at what side hustle can you pick up right now that can make you some money, whether it's baking cakes. In college, I used to bake Betty Crocker cakes and sell them for $20 for people's birthdays. You know, I used to buy everything for $4 and then make that money back. So like, identify where can you make a little bit of money, even if it's like, you know, the DoorDash and things like that. There's money to make right now. And so I know times are hard, but really start to identify what problem can you solve? If you have money, how can you make that money work for you? Or what side hustle can you pick up right now to make some more money?
Beautiful. I love it. Ada, I appreciate you hopping on here. I would love to catch up with you somewhere down the line and keep hearing more about what you're working on and this new brand. I wish you the best of luck with it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Of course. All right. Thank you. Take care. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. Man, big thank you to my guest this week, Ada Rojas. Just an incredibly insightful conversation. Honestly, super therapeutic, at least for me personally. So big shout out to her for hopping on. Now, before I get out of here, of course, I want to end on some positivity, as I always do, in the form of a positive quote. Now, it is Women's History Month. So all month long, my quotes are coming from incredibly influential, inspiring, and powerful women. And somebody who represents all of those things and so much more is, of course, our queen, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And this quote is from a recent interview she did. I just found it to be super compelling, especially relating to the conversation I was having with Ada. The quote is, I used to, frankly, abuse myself mentally about how I'm nothing. I realized that I need to choose myself because if I don't, I'm just going to waste away. I'm going to give up. And that's incredibly powerful and an incredibly vulnerable thing of her to talk about, but that's the truth. I mean, in this conversation I had with Ada, we talk about the work that you have to do on yourself aside from doing all the other things we hear about, right? We're always hearing about building wealth and saving our money and generational wealth, all the stuff that comes along with that. And that's all incredibly amazing. But the reality is, if we don't also deal with the traumas that we've been carrying around for years, we're never going to truly enjoy those things. We're never going to be able to enjoy the fruits of our labor. And I talked about my own personal story a little bit in there, where I'm having, some of the biggest moments of my entire life, and I can't fully enjoy them because I'm carrying around old baggage, old trauma that no longer serves me. So I have to do the work on myself to let go of those things so I can now enjoy these fruits of my labor. And that's what I challenge all of you to do. I mean, as people of color, we carry around so much baggage, so many experiences that have shaped the way we are today. And while they've maybe served us in the past and certain behaviors have served us in the past, we need to let go of those negative things, those negative aspects of our lives if we're truly trying to move forward and have, the best version of ourselves in the future, who can truly and 100% rightfully say that they're living their best life and enjoying all the fruits of the work and labor that they've put into it. So put that work in on yourself, and trust me, you're going to be enjoying everything that comes to you that much more. Now, with that said, thank y'all so much for tuning into this week's show. Appreciate you guys, as I always do. Just giving that support. It's always, trust me, always felt. And I really do appreciate you guys tuning in and showing me the love that you do. That's it for today's show, though. I'll be back next week, of course, with another amazing guest and hopefully some more insights for you that you can enjoy. Until then, stay safe. Talk to you soon. Bye.